So welcome everyone to our evening with Cara Black. I am thrilled. I'm Shireen Ash, librarian at the Corte Madera Library, and it is my great pleasure to introduce you to Cara Black. So as I've said to those of you who came on early, I really appreciate that you stay mute throughout. Did you want to say something? You're good? Okay. That you stay mute throughout because it just allows all of us to hear better. And if you have any questions, we hope you do, please put them in the chat and I will read them out. So I'm going to start out with some questions and then we'll dive into yours. But first, let me introduce our guest tonight. As most of you know, I'm sure many of you know all about her already, but anyway, Cara Black is the author of 21 books in the New York Times best-selling Aimée Leduc series, as well as two standalone thrillers, 3 Hours in Paris, which is a national bestseller, and A Night Flight to Paris. She has received multiple nominations for the Anthony and Macavity Awards, the Book World Book of the Year citation, and impressively, the Paris City Medal, which is awarded in recognition of contributions to international culture. With more than 400 books in print, the Aimée Leduc series has been translated into German, Norwegian, Japanese, French, Spanish, Italian, and Hebrew. Cara Black lives in San Francisco with her husband and visits Paris frequently. On each visit, she immerses herself into a different part of the city and researches the city and that section of the city so she can bring real life details to our reading and enjoyment of her novels. She has posed as a journalist to sneak into closed off areas, trained at a firing range with real Paris flicks or policemen. And just like Aimée has gone down into the sewers with the rats, which is a level of devotion I'm not sure all novelists would have, but I appreciate. To learn about real crime, she actually has taken out Paris policemen or flicks to dinner and drinks to kind of garner their stories and hear about them. So tonight she is celebrating with us two milestones in her publishing history: the 21st Aimée Leduc novel, Murder in La Villette, and 25 years of her first novel is in print as of March of this year, and that's Murder in the Marais, which I'm sure many of us have read, if not have read all of her works. So with that, welcome, welcome. And let me get started with research because all of your books are based on deep research. Of course, as a librarian, that really resonates with me. So do you want to talk about your process to research the various neighborhoods, all of them, I guess?
Yeah, well, thank you, Shireen, and thank you to the Marin Corte Madera Library for having me, and to all of you who came tonight. I saw somewhere Judy Rupp. Hi, Judy, a friend. um, yeah, so research. Well, I just have to say that's the best part of my job because that means I have to go to Paris, right? And that's a tough job, but someone's got to do it. And when I started out researching Murder in the Marais, my first book in the 90s, I didn't even have a laptop. I mean, a lot of us didn't have computers. So I needed to go to archives here. I went to the Jewish library here. I went to Paris, and I would go to archives and to the Jewish Center, which was then in a very small little apartment. Now it has a big center on it of its own. But I would go to these places. They were run by volunteers, and I would, try to hunt through to find out things. And I have to say it's a lot easier now because we can look at things digitally. But it's also important for me when I go to Paris to look in the real archives, and touch the papers and find something. I found something that was kind of misfiled in a folder, and I was like, wow, this is just amazing. So I'm all about hands-on research if I can. And of course, when I started, and we briefly mentioned it, I was not published. I was just this curious American woman who had an idea and who would talk to me. So sometimes when you say, well, I'm working on a book, people aren't necessarily, well, what book, was your last book published? So newbies, we have a little window there. We can kind of go, keep talking and go. And of course, once I got published, it was easier to get introductions and meet police and, to be taken maybe a little more seriously. And I feel in Paris, they do. They, once I was published, it was very much, I don't know, they really respect, books and literature and writing. And I think a lot more than we do in our country. And so it really helped a lot, you know. And there's so many different archives too, different periods of time. And I have to say, the police museum in Paris, which is in the left bank, also has this, it's an incredible museum about the police. It's also a commissariat, and deep down in the dungeon is a firing range where I got to go. So it had everything I needed.
It's wonderful that they were receptive to you.
Yeah, I'm very lucky. And I worked it, I'll be honest, I really tried to, respect that they had jobs and families and limited time. And I was, so, the offer of a meal always helps, right? So can you meet for lunch? Can you, and then I feel, and I've learned so much, that people like to talk about what they do. And when you're asking them questions about procedure or how they would handle a crime scene or just the hierarchy in the police, they want you to get it right. They really do. I suppose we all do, right? You, in your job in the library, you want someone to portray it accurately, you know.
Are you going to write a novel about a librarian next?
Well, I know whose mind I can plumb.
You can have my mind.
Thank you.
So, I know you talked about World War II research, and we were discussing before we came online about how that led to or influenced your writing of Night Flight to Paris. Do you want to talk about how the research, I don't know, did the research lead you to the book? Was it just another way to express or delve into World War II in more detail?
Yeah, I had written 3 Hours in Paris, the first Kate Reese, that was set in 1940, and based on a tidbit I found in a library book with this footnote about how Hitler came to Paris for 3 hours and left and never returned. So that was a springboard for that book. I felt like, I thought Kate Reese had another story to tell. She, there was a lot. In 1940, the war goes on till 44, 45. So there was other opportunities for her. And I really became interested when a friend of mine showed me, and I think probably a lot of people here tonight have been, of course, been to Paris and know the Hotel Lutetia on the left bank, very posh neighborhood. It's a superstar, many star hotel. But I was shown a Christmas menu for the Abwehr, no, not the Abwehr, the German military intelligence Christmas dinner in the Hotel Lutetia. I think it was 1942. And I was like, what? And they were headquartered in the Hotel Lutetia, which is now a super plush hotel. And I was like, so the German military intelligence were headquartered there, they lived there, they ran their offices there, or billeted there. And I was like, wow, this is kind of the hub, a big intelligence hub. And that sort of sparked me, seeing this Christmas menu from wartime, in German with the food they were eating. I was like, what would that have been like? So that sort of random thing that I saw sparked the story. And then I, had to do a lot of research, different kind of research than usually I do for the Aimée Leduc books, because they're more contemporary. And this, I got to really delve into World War II and the occupation, little known facts because it was hard to find out about, the about a lot of things. But as I've discovered, even now, 80 years after the war, things are slowly becoming declassified. Can you believe it? Not everything. And there was a lot of untold stories about women during World War II, especially in British intelligence. And those women took they vowed to keep secret, and they weren't to talk about it. And many of them went to their grave without talking about it. And there's a British historian, Dr. Helen Fry, and this is one of her books, but she has written these incredible histories. And she talks about when she goes to the archives in Britain, in London, in Kew, and she said there'll be something that has just been declassified. And it's hard to see how this is so, why this has been kept secret for so long. But there's so many stories we don't know. And that just fascinates me.
It's astounding to me. It just after so much time that there are still so many stories, and those personal stories really make the history, I think, come alive for many of us.
Right.
As opposed to just reading the history, reading a story about it has more resonance, I think. Do you want to talk about how you research for the Aimée Leduc novels, since that's different? That's geographically based. I imagine
Sure.
that involves wandering around a lot, going to cafes.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, you're right. Cafes, getting lost, turning the corner and discovering something new. Yeah, so this in Murder at La Villette, the latest story, I knew I wanted to set it in the 19th arrondissement, which is northeast Paris. Some people call it the Bronx of Paris. The canal goes through it. It and then it widens out, and the barges can go up to Belgium, Germany, Northern Europe. And it used to be a very big industrial hub, sugar refineries where the barges could load off sugar beets. And it's always had this sort of immigrant population, usually from Europe. People would come because, especially in Germany, at the turn of the century, 1900s, there were big agricultural disasters. So lots of Germans came into this area and worked in the factories, and their families lived with them. And so it's always been this sort of working class sort of people have immigrated there, and they live there with their families, and they live near where they work. And but so I knew I needed to write about that because it was the last arrondissement left, and I thought, how would Aimée Leduc be involved? What would she be doing there? Where are we in her life? And I knew that she'd be working in the 19th arrondissement. She'd be in an undercover job through the ministry, and she'd be working in a startup funded by the 19th arrondissement initiative. And she'd be there and working, and she would be just really, she didn't like the toxic environment in the workplace. And she stood up for one of the employees, a woman who was a cleaner and who had, been a druggie, and who was on, really working hard, supporting a disabled brother. And so she really stood up for this woman that will later impact in the story. And I thought that was a way to into the story, why Aimée would be there, who she'd be interacting with. And so I was really working with that, and how the canal would be an important part of the story. And then talking about meeting flics and taking them to lunch or dinner. Patrick, who I've known for quite a while, he's in the Brigade Criminelle, which is the elite Paris homicide squad. So there are several squads in the Brigade Criminelle. And Patrick, I said, Patrick, I would really love to take you to lunch. And he's so busy, he really is. And he said, well, I live in the 19th arrondissement. Okay. I went, great. Maybe you can show me something, interesting. And, I always need something new for my story. And he goes, I know. So we we were. I was on the way to meet him, and I heard on the news, or maybe I saw it on TV, that a man who had a serial killer who had eluded the police for more than 30 years had been discovered. And his crime started in the 1980s. And there was a composite sketch of him because they didn't have, photo fits then. And there was of someone who thought they saw was the possible suspect of this killer of a young girl. And in the picture, he had pock marks, like he'd had severe acne or smallpox. And this was on the wall of every police station in France. He was never caught. But that morning, I heard that he had been discovered. So when I met Patrick, I noticed people were kind of in the cafe. They were sort of talking, and I don't know, I was kind of just noticing that. And I was talking to Patrick, and he said, yeah, this man who's, eluded us for all this time has been discovered. And, it's really been very shameful for the police, that we never found him. And I said, wow, well, and um, I was thinking of our Golden State Killer here who eluded, right, the FBI for many years. And he said, yeah. And the first known victim was an 8-year-old girl. I said, oh, wow. And he goes, yeah. And you know where it happened? And I don't know. Around the corner. It happened in the 19th arrondissement, up the street. I said, really? And he goes, yeah. Do you want to go see the apartment building? And I went, okay, kind of creepy, but, of course it happened. And after we ate, we walked up there. It really is right there. And it's, one of these apartment blocks, working class. And there were knots of people on the pavement talking. And I realized that this community or parts of this community had been there, whether they were the grandparents now or, had been their neighbors or classmates who are now, adults, had been, affected by this. And I thought there was such a community that was sort of talking about this and coming together in some way. And that really, really struck me. And Patrick looked at me and said, hey, you wanted a story, didn't you? And I went, I don't want to write about a serial killer. But I think I found it, but for me, it's more important the victims, the families of the victims, the people I saw on the street who were still affected by this, who, whether it was, the neighbor, their children have been in class together. And I thought about the ripple effect, how that still affected people and this generational trauma. So that just sort of happened because I was, meeting with Patrick, and I hope I'm sort of answering your story, but I felt that was sort of the fabric of the place I was discovering. And I couldn't ignore it, or not that I would want to, but it's very community and very, very diverse ethnic and cultural groups. There's 30 synagogues in the 19th arrondissement, 30. And no one ever thinks of it as a Jewish area, but parts of it are Orthodox Jewish, and they have many schools, and they live next to people from North Africa. There'll be a supermarket, a kosher supermarket, and next to it is like a mom and pop Arab store. And they talk amongst each other, and they say, oh, I didn't see you come home yesterday. I was, oh no, my doctor's appointment was late, Mustafa. I mean, they have each other's backs. And nobody talks about this part of Paris, and the community, So I really, this is fascinating to me. So, and that's kind of research is just kind of trying to dig deeper and discover the kind of the flavor of the arrondissement, It has some very posh areas too, very picturesque quartiers with these small pastel colored houses that used to be for workers, but of course now they're very, very expensive. But and they have the beautiful Butte de Chaumont, the park, and it's got some charming areas and some sketchy areas too, let's say.
It's interesting. You almost, it sounds like come in as an anthropologist a little bit,
I
very,
like that.
yeah, yeah. And I wanted to note how it sounds like serendipity plays a huge role in what evolves, which is delightful, I have to say. Something you said about the culture of reading in Paris intrigued me. And I know for years and years, mystery writers and mysteries weren't accorded much respect in literature departments in the United States. And I was interested to know how your books are received in France and in Paris, and how you are received. I mean, obviously, you got a great honor, so I have to, for drawing attention to Paris, but I guess I have to assume it's also because you're an author. Is that the case?
Um, maybe. Yeah, they seem to have a respect, not just for me, for I've done events with other mystery authors, thriller authors, often. And yeah, there's something that we're but I mean, on a side note, the French love polar, which are crime novels, right? They love I mean, look at George Simenon and Inspector Maigret. I mean, and they love Agatha Christie. I went by a bookstore near the old Roman baths. It's a great bookstore. It takes like a corner of a block, and in the window I saw only Agatha Christie in French. But it was her, 100 years of whatever birth or whatever, and I was like, it was I couldn't believe all the books she had, every edition. And so they really have they love Agatha Christie. They love, polars. I mean, they love poetry. They have I don't know, they will listen because you've written, and that's very important, the written word. So, maybe I get more respect for that. But yeah, and I thought, how many more editions can they do of Agatha Christie? I don't know. My friend's mother is like always like reading Agatha Christie, and I thought, you must have read every one twice.
They still really hold their value, I think. They still are intriguing to many people, as I'm sure your novels are as well. And we'll give you another 50, 70 years to see how it works out in the future. Um, I wanted to see, we're starting to accumulate some questions, but I have
Oh, good.
a few more for you. So put your questions in the chat and I'll get to them. Um, so I was interested to know, since you've been going to Paris for so many years now, what changes in attitude, and I know there's been a lot, so maybe just choose a few that have impacted you or found their way into your stories, changes in perception. Certainly, you've talked about the willingness to be open about the involvement in World War II, which is contentious. And I know there are a lot of deep feelings, although as people age out, that's going to change. But I'm just curious, as a regular traveler to Paris and someone who delves deep into the culture of a certain arrondissement, what are you seeing in terms of changes that you think are worth mentioning or that have found their way into your works?
And I started noticing more globalization. Um, and I was trying to think of when I, actually twigged on that. Because they were always against globalization, no, we are French and everything. And fine. But then when the internet just took off, and everyone can be online, or everyone can, see everything or see what they couldn't ever see before. I think that's really changed. I'm trying to think of when I was at the Place de la Bastille, um, I can't remember what book I was working on, maybe Murder in the Bastille or quite a few books ago. I saw these kids and they came out with their skateboards in Place de la Bastille near the column. And I was shocked because I never had seen French children, French kids, whatever, adults, teenagers on skateboards in the center of Paris. And I was like, whoa, things are changing. And because why shouldn't they have skateboards? I mean, I'm not against that, but of course, now everybody rents those scooters and all over it's different. But when I noticed that and I thought about it, and I thought this globalization, this explosion of the internet, whatever mid, because it took a while before it became so pervasive. Um, that's when I really noticed a change. But when I first went to Paris, I noticed anti-Semitism, anti-immigrants, as I've noticed in our own country, my country, and I still hear those kinds of things for whatever reason, and and I'm just an outsider. But so when I was researching the 19th arrondissement and seeing these Orthodox Jewish population. I mean, really Orthodox, right? With the curls and they do the celebrations and then you have people from North Africa and living together. I thought this is like an open secret. I mean, this is kind of like community at work, which here are people living this. I'm not saying there aren't issues, but it was very different. And this is very, people don't talk about this. And everyone goes, no, they don't have any synagogues in the 19th. I go, yeah, I counted them. um, and so I was just struck by that. I don't know if it's because people work, they're concerned about their families. They can still find a place to live in Paris with their families, and it's about work, school, homework, shopping, laundry, repeat, and it's not that people don't do that everywhere, but I guess, um, but, but yes, I think a phrase I remember hearing and I put it in Murder in the Marais of a man who made a very racist comment. I've heard those things today. So things change and they don't change.
Yeah, sums it up, it seems.
Yeah, yeah. It's very, very interesting, you know.
Anything that you want to share about your latest work? I know it's just been published. It's number 21. So you've covered all of Paris now. What does that mean?
That means Aimée has no other arrondissement to investigate. I've also investigated twice in an arrondissement because I made a mistake. but I so what could I say about Murder at La Villette? I think writing it, I learned, or I felt, I've learned this along the way, but I think I felt more deeply, especially since this was based on an actual, inspired by. It's not based on. It's inspired, and I fictionalize this, but it's how mysteries can make sense of the senseless, and it gives order to what feels like randomness of crime. And good things happen to bad people, and bad things happen to good people, you know. But I think maybe we read them to restore some order in the world, on the page.
That's interesting. It's interesting to think about why people read a certain genre, why people read mysteries. But I like that, to bring order to the world and to make sense of often very disturbing events.
Right, right. And of course this whole book is not totally a bummer,
Of
or
course not.
heavy. I
No
mean,
one, yeah.
I mean, they do go to cafes, she has a big, she's very fashionable and she's on the run, so she's got to change her clothes all the time and look different. And people always like that. They go, how can she do that? I go, well, if you had someone chasing you and you had to find a killer, you would, and you couldn't use, your usual electronic means. She's on the run in most of this story. And so she's got to hide and change her clothing. And she for anyone who's worried about it, she does change her clothes a lot.
So there's a lot
It
of
looks
fashion in
freaking,
this one.
yep, because she's constantly got to have a different look.
Right, to evade.
Yeah,
Love
yeah,
that.
totally.
Love that. So, can I ask you what's next for you, or do you know?
Yeah, well, I finally heard from my editor, who I've been waiting to hear from, about the next book. And she's said, well, I'm going to get you back your notes, but I'm really, really liking it. It's just really so good news, knock on wood. But I don't have all her notes on it. But so um, let's see, it's based post-war France, right at liberation and the aftermath, and it talks about a young woman's journey, and it's not the liberation we think of with the GIs rolling in with the tanks throwing chocolates and kissing the girls. It was a really, really difficult time post-war France. They were still rationed. They had the coldest winter in history. After the war, there was no charcoal. The country's infrastructure, as all of Europe, especially Germany, was down. But it's this young woman's kind of journey through that, and what happens to her. And I will say that if you read the Aimée Leduc books, you might recognize a few characters, but it's not important if you haven't read the Aimée books, but you just might recognize a few characters. And there's a wonderful scene. I hope my editor still will let me leave, oh, won't change it too much, at the Cannes Film Festival in 1958.
Oh,
So we get a little bit of the film world and the glam. So,
that
but
sounds
that's all
fun.
I can. Yeah, it was fun to write.
Do you do you enjoy the process going back and forth with an editor? Is that pleasurable or is that difficult? What's that like for you as a writer?
It's a working relationship, at least in my case. Now, you probably had other authors that come on, and everyone might have different experiences.
Mhm.
um, I've been always very collaborative with my editor at Soho, and a lot of times they'll do kind of like a developmental read, kind of like, oh, is this making sense? Would this happen in the story, plot wise, the pace, and which is I find really helpful. Not some people hire developmental editors, but I get to talk with my editor, so it's always different. Again, some agents actually do that for their writers. It really depends. And I'm sure all the people that visit you have different experiences, but I enjoy it because she's really smart.
That
And
sounds like it's very fun for you.
I choose my battles, I'll be honest. You know what I mean? There's what am I going to fight for, and I really choose it carefully.
And it must be really helpful to have kind of deep insight at sort of the nuts and bolts level of the writing process.
Totally. And she'll go, wait a minute, Aimée didn't do that a couple of books ago. Oh, you're right, because I forget.
So she's your walking memory. Lovely. That's interesting. It seems like a fun relationship. Well, I am going to go see what questions we have. So if you haven't asked one, please do. Oh, I only have a couple. So Judy, your friend, says bonjour. How far into the development of your latest story did you determine or decide the ending? Hope for a catch up with you in May in Paris. Merci.
I sort of had a very vague idea of the ending. I knew there would be some resolution to the issue, to the problems that this character would have. She would surmount things, and I knew there would be that. And I sort of had one way that was, I wrote, and that didn't seem to work. And I wrote another way. And then, but I always sort of had a reckoning for her um, at the end of the story. So that the way I wrote it or the circumstances changed, but I did have that kind of reckoning, coming to terms, kind of something at the end. So so I like it. I hope my editor does.
Hope so. Thank you for that. And Josette asks or says, I've enjoyed reading your books. They make me feel as if I am in Paris. You have obviously done quite a bit of research on each of the areas. How much time do you typically spend researching an area?
Well, that's a great question. And of course, I always say never enough. um, but when I've been working, and I'll just talk about the Aimée books, when I've been working on the Aimée books, I go to Paris. I have friends I can stay with. That's the reason I can go. And I can stay with them and I go out and spend time in the arrondissement. And a lot of times, or often, it has happened that I've met someone and they have said, oh, I want you to meet this other person who knows this or who lives there or whatever. And of course we try to meet up and they're gone with their kids on vacation, they're working, whatever, and we never get that. But I get an introduction so that when I go home and I'm working on the book and I go back 6 months later, I've been, probably barraging this poor person and set up a meet so we can meet. And I can also, I've gone ahead in the story and then I get a new maybe insight from the person I get to meet, or they introduce me to someone or something. So, and I also, when I'm in Paris, I'm always jotting ideas for the next story. So I have, and so the 19th arrondissement, this book, I have notes on the 19th arrondissement from about 5 or 6 years ago, because I would hear a great fact or find something really interesting. It didn't go in the Aimée story I was writing, but it was great. And I put it in my 19th arrondissement file, for later, if I ever even wrote the story. So I have kind of things that I could use or would work in the story, or could, a storyline of Aimée in a certain relationship. So they're in these files, and I can look at the 19th arrondissement. I've got some nice tidbits in there. There's different things Aimée would be doing maybe here. So it's not one visit, one book. I'm constantly kind of, putting it in the file if it doesn't belong. And there's a miscellaneous file, then there's an arrondissement file, then there's fashion file. I hope
Very
that answers it.
organized.
Oh, well, it sounds organized.
So thank you. That was really helpful, honestly. And I'm sure any would-be writers out there also appreciate that. Pat and Terry asked, what are your favorite archives in Paris? There are so many.
Totally. I like the archives out at the Bois de Vincennes, Chateau de Vincennes, the military, at the end of line one. A very historic fort and lots of history. But they also have archives in the part of the military there, because it's military. So I've gone to those archives. I like them. They're very helpful people, the guys, because sometimes I go in and I don't know, I think I want this, or very understanding. And then I went to an archive new to me out at Saint-Ouen, which is actually really easy. It was so difficult for me to find it. And then when I found it, I'm like, it's right across from the metro. Why did I go all the way around here? But that one also, you need to get a card. You need to, apply for the card, have your picture. You need to go in and present it. You need to request what you wish, the files or whatever. And then you have to wait a day or two, to come back, because they have to go down and find them. So it all takes a little planning. It's not, but of course, once you have the files out and you may not have finished them, or they'll be there for you for, I don't know, 5 days or whatever it is. So once you've gone through the legwork, things are okay. But again, it always takes that time, I guess, in any archive to do that. The ones in London, outside at Kew Gardens, where actually Dr. Helen Fry goes, those are getting more and more easy to research digitally. But again, I don't. You got to figure it out and everything, and what you're looking for. But yeah,
That's interesting that they're digitally accessible. I mean, just as a librarian, I appreciate that the Library of Congress, for instance, has put so much online.
digital.
And
Yeah, and you can see them
yeah,
in. I mean, the actual documents too. I mean, most of them,
yeah.
except the ones they haven't declassified.
And you said prior to our coming online that there's still quite a lot of material that's not declassified, even from World War II, which is
Oh
fascinating.
yeah, 80 years. 80 years. There are things that are just becoming declassified for whatever reason, whether it's and for whatever reason it's been held, held classified. I mean, when you read it, you go, what is that? There are no state secrets valid now. Sure, I understand where. No, these are not valid state secrets. But yeah, there are things coming out, whatever reasoning is there. And there are many MI6, they're never coming out. They have a policy. They never release those.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's just no. And who knows, what happens in France. I know there are archives that will never be released also
Interesting.
because of the descendants of collaborators, or that's what I was told. I was told it was 120 years or something, and then he said to me, "And what do you think their excuse will be in 120 years?"
Interesting. It's a long
Yeah,
reach.
long range.
Mhm. I guess this goes without saying, but you're reading all this in French?
A lot of it I'm reading in French. Yeah, yeah, and that it takes time, but and that I love. I think my comprehension is better reading, and I can also check everything too. Translate, make sure I get it right.
Mm-hmm. So, our next question from Pam, thank you, is will we read about Aimée again in any future books, or do we say goodbye with your 21st book?
Good question. I don't know. It's a mystery.
So that's the perfect
Sorry.
answer. So it sounds like in terms of, I've heard mystery authors talk about either being a plotter or a pantser. A plotter being someone who kind of has their outline before they embark on their novel, and a pantser does it by the seat of their pants. How would you describe yourself in those
Definitely
terms?
not an outliner. I think I'm more of a pantser. And I'd like to allow for serendipity when I go to Paris and discover a story, or change it, or so. But I think probably now someone said, "You're becoming more of a plantser." I said, "Okay, why?" She goes, "Because now you say you write 100 pages and then I timeline it. I mean, 100 pages of a draft. I mean, I'm not saying it's great or anything, but I write 100 pages to see if I have a story. And then it's like, okay, so then I timeline and I use color post-its because I have Aimée, her partner Renee, her daughter Chloe, we have all the people in her life, her godfather Morbier, we have, so I kind of put it out there to see who's where, when, why would they be there then, because they had just logistics. And then I do a low timeline of the villain, perpetrator, the architect of noir, the architect of the story, because that's why we have the story, because someone has committed a crime, murder. So that's all in the background. Maybe it's off page sometimes. So then I kind of do that. So that's why it's a plantser, because the L is kind of meaning timeline, I'm thinking.
Well, it sounds
Anyway,
like, and this is sort of what I was hearing, is that you're a bit of a hybrid because,
hybrid.
based on between a plotter and a pantser, which is maybe what this person was getting at. That's what I'm hearing. Because for instance, in the question and that was asked earlier, when did you know something would happen at the end? But you said you knew, you just changed the mechanism a few times till you got it right, till you were comfortable with, but you knew something was going to. So it
Right.
sounds to me like that suggests plotting and planning and but I think that makes sense. Honestly, I see colored spreadsheet lines when you talk about the timeline and the colored post-its and making sure that they sync and are logical. I mean, it impresses me about how much um, seriously logical work needs to go in to make sure all the elements of the story make sense, so that somebody on page 138 isn't going, what, that there's nothing. Why did that happen? There was no
Right.
basis for that.
You've got to seed the clues, you've got to plant the suspects, you've got to people lie for different reasons, maybe nothing to do with the crime. But also, oh, I just forgot what I was going to say. But to get back to what you're saying about Aimée, I do know that because I like to read a book where there is resolution, where
Mhm.
there is some form of justice served. And not all the bows are tied, but I want some justice served. And that's what I like to read. That's what I like to write. So I know Aimée's going to get her man, or, you know, in a manner of speaking, and so I think that's playing fair with the reader, too. I mean, why are we going to read a story where it's all open-ended? We want a resolution. We want right to triumph in some form, not everything. So I do know that Aimée will do her best, unless she's murdered, to get, justice served. So I do
and
have that sort of
and maybe that
always.
is part of the draw too, is
Yeah,
to have that sense of, people, the world is a vague and disturbing place and quite wonderful as well, but to have a sense of resolution and completion and to tie it up. And as you say, to have justice served. We don't always get that in our lives,
that's
and in our
right.
political lives as well. So
Right.
everyone, we've just got a few minutes left. So if you have a burning question or a fun question, any question for Cara Black or Aimée, this is your moment. So do not be shy.
I think someone
Ah,
was asking. Yeah.
yeah,
What?
go ahead. Someone said, I'm not up to date on your, um,
Oh, I can't see that.
so it says, oh, sorry, I got a little out of order. So I love this question. What authors do you like to read for pleasure?
I like to read many people. I read, what am I reading right now? I'm reading a Scottish author, um, whose name escapes me, but it's really quirky and dark. Beautiful descriptions of Edinburgh and the Highlands, just lovely.
The bee sting?
Um, I don't
Is
know.
it the bee sting?
It's a woman who's a journalist who's been laid off.
Yeah.
Uh, um, I don't know. I don't know about the BBC. I like a lot of the Nordic, the Scandi noir. I'm still reading that. I really, for fun, I like those Finlay Donovan books, kind of madcap, kind of implausible but fun. Mom who's a mystery writer who solves crime and has to meet a deadline with two kids. It's just fun, right? Um, yeah, I read. Yeah, I read all over the place. I read probably more serious books for my book group. They're much more literary, but that's okay. We just read a Brazilian author who was new to me. It was great. Don't ask me the name, but yeah, they actually read my book in the group, so they said, of course. we also read genre.
Thank you for that. And at this point, I believe our last question so far is, I'm not up to date on your books, but has her family ever been threatened? So I'm guessing by this you mean Amy's family has been threatened.
Um, well, in this book, Amy's threatened, and she might lose her daughter and be put in prison. So she's very much herself threatened and her family. But yeah, but I can't tell you because that's a spoiler alert. Yes, people have been threatened because we know the best way to get to someone is through their family, or someone they hold dear to them, or that's kind of the bottom line, right? The stakes go high, and what wouldn't you do, to save your family or a member of your family? So, sure. And I think the stakes in this book are very high because if she again does not find the perpetrator, she could lose everything, and the killer could strike again too. So
But,
it just
but
brings it closer too when it's an interesting question because it does bring it closer when the actual detective or protagonist family is threatened. But you can't do that in every book, right? You have to, yeah,
mix it up.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, we do have time for one more question. Going once, going twice, three times.
It,
Oh, go ahead.
let me. Susan, is it Susan who asked me about a restaurant in Paris? I
Oh,
think
did I miss a question?
No, I think earlier she emailed me and was
Oh,
she sent me some photos of her doors. Lovely. She loves to take pictures of doors and took a picture of Amy's agency. I think it's right. I think I'm right. Yes. Um, and she asked about restaurants, and I'm like, I'm still scratching my head because it really people ask me that, and I'm like, I don't know. Are you vegetarian? What do you eat? I mean, we're from California, right? Are you lacto intolerant or whatever? It's hard to recommend people unless they say, I want to eat, Neo Bistro or something. But there's a great app called Le Fooding. It's like one word. It's like lefooding.com. And you just install the app. It's free. And you can go by arrondissement. You click it and you can say what you want to, type of food, price range, and you can click on it. So I meant to share that.
that seems like a great, great suggestion. I think maybe it's Susan, if you want to pop in your question, and if it's the Susan I know, I think she eats pretty broadly. She's not a vegan. So if you have a particular, if you want to ask very specifically, can you spell La Foodie?
It's the Lefooding. Le Fooding.
Oh, the
It's
fooding.
one word.
Okay. Okay.
Lefooding.com. Like, you know what they call jogging in France? Le footing. Le footing. Footing. I'm like, footing. Le, that means jogging. Oh, he makes le footing. I'm
So
like,
is
oh, okay.
Le Fooding, is it for just Paris or is it all of
I'm
France?
not sure. I'm
All
not
right.
sure. I just use it for Paris, but
Okay.
I would imagine. No, I probably,
Yeah,
probably all over France. You just have to go there and look at the filters. I'm sorry, I don't.
that's
There it
okay.
is.
You're not a
Blue
travel
fooding.
agent. I just
Yeah.
put it in the chat for
Okay.
everyone so you can see it's a food app for eating in Paris and more. So,
Yeah.
and
You
beyond.
download it and you put in like your price range, your what are you feeling like Thai or whatever sushi or they're really big. Sushi's really big, but um, so you can kind of navigate it.
So, everyone, you not only got to talk to the renowned author and hear about her research, but you also have a great new food app for when you go to France. So, it's been, I have to say, a delightful evening. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you for your love of libraries and for offering these programs, I want to say that it's because you reached out to libraries to say, I want to celebrate these milestones. I'm a great lover of libraries. I remember when my dad brought me, was it 5 years old, to get your
When
first
I could
library card?
read. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was reading at 5, folks. Um, and
Well, very simple books.
yeah, no, I know. But I just love that full circle feeling that, you know, libraries were there for you, you're here for libraries, and as an author, you supply libraries. So what more could we ask for? So I want to say how much fun I've had chatting with you. It's been a delight. You're such a bright and thoughtful author. I think you bring so much complexity to your work and so much
Oh,
thoughtfulness.
thank you.
It's really engaging and it's interesting, and I appreciate how respectful you are of the culture, that
Thank you.
you investigate yourself and then you share with us. So I just want to thank you again, and thank you all of us for joining us. And
Thank
with
you.
that, I'll say goodnight and wish everyone, how do I say goodnight in French?
Bonne nuit.
Bonne nuit,
Bonsoir. Thank you,
bonsoir,
everyone. And thank you, Shireen. And it's been
oh,
bonsoir.
bonsoir.